My name is Jillian Vance, and I am 33 years old. On Mother's Day, in front of 14 relatives at the Oak Ridge Country Club, my mother opened the hand-bound archival album I'd spent 6 weeks restoring for her, looked me dead in the eye, and dropped it into the restaurant trash next to a pile of discarded linen napkins. My sister laughed. My father looked at his steak, and my mother smoothed her silk dress and asked the waiter for more iced tea. What none of them knew, what my mother had spent 34 years hiding, was that the vintage black-and-white photograph I had placed on the final page wasn't just an old family memory. It was proof of a secret that was about to strip my mother of the very estate she used to control us. Before we get into the rest of this, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop your city and your local time in the comments below. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now, let me take you back to a small bookbinding studio on Elm Street, 3 weeks before that lunch, and the dusty leather ledger that started it all. I am a rare book conservator and master bookbinder. It is quiet work, meticulous work, the kind of trade where success is measured in fractions of a millimeter and the invisible repair of torn calfskin. It doesn't pay in millions, but it pays for my modest house, my independence, and my peace of mind. My family, however, has always considered my profession an embarrassment. My father, Arthur Vance, made his fortune in commercial timber and real estate across Northern California. My mother, Eleanor, grew up in old money, or at least, that was the story she told everyone at the country club. She valued 3 things above all else: social standing, rigid obedience, and my younger sister, Chloe. Chloe is 28. She doesn't work. She lives in a high-rise condominium in San Francisco that my father pays for, and her primary occupation is attending charity galas and organizing her wardrobe by color. Growing up, Chloe was the golden child who could do no wrong. If Chloe broke an antique vase, I was blamed for standing too close to it. If Chloe failed a semester of college, my parents bought the university a new library wing. I was the eldest, the quiet one, the daughter who preferred the smell of bone folder starch and hide glue to high society tea parties. And because I didn't fit Eleanor's mold of a proper Vance woman, I was treated like a glorified tenant in my own childhood home. When I announced at 22 that I was taking an apprenticeship under a master binder instead of applying to law school, my mother didn't speak to me for 8 months. When I bought my little workshop with a small inheritance from my maternal grandfather, my father called it a hobby shop and asked when I was going to get a real job. I told myself it didn't hurt. I told myself that my work mattered, that preserving history was nobler than chasing pretense. But there is a specific kind of ache that stays with you when your own mother looks at your life's passion like something she needs to wash off her hands. 3 weeks before Mother's Day, Eleanor called me. It wasn't a warm call. Eleanor never called just to ask how my week was going. "Jillian," she said, her voice sharp and clipped through the phone speaker. "Your sister is giving me a weekend at the spa in Napa for Mother's Day, a $3,000 package. What are you bringing to the dinner at Oak Ridge?" I took a deep breath, resting my hand on the heavy iron press on my workbench. "I'm working on something personal, Mom. A custom photo album. I'm restoring grandfather's old family prints and binding them in Japanese silk with hand-tooled leather." A long silence on the line, then a soft, condescending sigh. "Oh, another one of your craft projects. Well, I suppose we can't all afford real gifts. Just make sure it looks neat, Jillian. I don't want some glue-stained school project sitting on the table next to Chloe's box from Tiffany's." She hung up before I could answer. I sat at my bench for 20 minutes, staring at the brass finishing tools heating on the stove. Part of me wanted to throw the leather in the trash right then. Part of me wanted to buy a generic gift card and call it a day. But I still held onto that foolish, desperate hope that every neglected child carries deep in their chest. The belief that if I just made it beautiful enough, if I put enough of my soul into it, she would finally see me. So I worked. I spent 40 hours restoring 42 old family photographs. I cleaned the silver gelatin prints, flattened the curled edges, and hand-stitched the signatures using Irish linen thread. The final print in the stack was one I had found in the bottom of my grandfather's estate trunk 3 years ago, a faded 1990 portrait of Eleanor standing on the steps of an old stone estate in coastal Maine, holding a newborn baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. I had always assumed the baby was me. I was born in August 1990. The date on the back of the photo was August 14th, 1990. It seemed like the perfect closing page for a book about our family's history. I had no idea that I was binding my mother's death warrant. The next afternoon, an elderly gentleman named Mr. Julian Croft entered my shop. He was 82 years old, built like a retired judge, with silver hair, sharp hazel eyes, and a tweed coat that smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and cedar. He carried a heavy, iron-bound wooden chest. "Miss Vance?" he asked, his voice low and resonant. "I was told by the Historical Society that you are the only person in the county who can handle delicate mid-century legal documents and private correspondence without destroying the paper." "That is my specialty, Mr. Croft," I said, clearing my consultation table. "How can I help you?" He set the chest down with a heavy thud. "These are the personal letters and legal journals of my late brother, Jonathan Croft. He passed away last winter. He was a prominent family lawyer in Maine for 40 years. Before I donate his papers to the state archives, I need the binding repaired and the loose letters encapsulated in acid-free sleeves. Some of these letters contain delicate historical matters regarding prominent California and East Coast families." We agreed on a price, and Mr. Croft left the chest with me. 2 days later, while carefully flattening a bundle of yellowed legal correspondence from August 1990, a familiar name caught my eye in the flowing cursive of a Maine notary public. Eleanor Vance, formerly Eleanor Thorne. I paused, my tweezers hovering over the brittle paper. I picked up my magnifying glass. The letter was a formal acknowledgement of receipt signed by my mother, dated August 18th, 1990, 4 days after my birthday. I read the first paragraph, and the air left my lungs as if I'd been struck in the chest with a sledgehammer. "I, Eleanor Vance, hereby acknowledge receipt of the sum of $250. Zero from the estate of Jonathan Croft, acting on behalf of the late Evelyn Croft. In exchange for this sum, I agree to assume full, permanent, informal custody of the infant female born on August 14, 1990, and to never divulge to the child or the public the true circumstances of her birth or her relation to the Croft timber holdings." My hands began to shake violently. I dropped the tweezers. Attached to the back of the legal document was a hospital birth record from Portland Memorial Hospital. Mother, Evelyn Croft. Father, unknown. Child, female. Adoptive receiving guardian, Eleanor Vance. Below the hospital record was a copy of the exact same photograph I had just spent 3 days mounting in my mother's day album. The woman in front of the stone estate, holding the baby in the yellow blanket. But the caption on the back of the archival lawyer's copy didn't say Eleanor and Jillian. It read, "Eleanor Thorne Vance taking possession of Evelyn's illegitimate daughter, Jillian Croft, paid in full." I sat in the absolute silence of my workshop for 2 hours while the clock on the wall ticked like a countdown. I wasn't Eleanor's daughter. I wasn't Arthur Vance's blood. I was an orphan, the secret child of a wealthy Maine heiress who had died in childbirth. My mother, the woman who had spent 33 years making me feel like a third-class citizen, the woman who had degraded my work, ignored my achievements, and treated me like an unwelcome intruder, had been paid $250,000 in 1990 to take me away and keep me quiet. She hadn't raised me out of love. She had taken me in as a commercial transaction to fund my father's early real estate deals. And because I wasn't her real blood, she had spent my entire life punishing me for existing while showering Chloe with everything. Now let me ask you a question. If you discovered that your entire life was built on a paid secret and the person who took money to raise you treated you like dirt for 30 years, what would you do? Would you scream? Would you call a lawyer? Or would you wait for the right moment to hand them the bill? Drop your answer in the comments right now. I read every single one. I didn't call a lawyer. Not yet. I spent the next 2 weeks digging through the rest of Mr. Croft's chest with the precision of a surgeon. What I found was even more explosive than the adoption paper. The Croft Family Timber Trust in Maine had never been fully dissolved. When Evelyn Croft died in 1990, her share of the multi-million-dollar coastal estate was placed into a perpetual land trust. The terms were explicit. If Evelyn's biological child was ever proven to be alive, that child would inherit 100% of the Croft Timber Reserve, which spanned 4,000 acres of prime waterfront property, along with a controlling interest in the commercial holding company that my father, Arthur Vance, had been leasing land from for his California business for the last 15 years. Arthur Vance didn't just know about the arrangement. His entire business depended on timber leases granted by the Croft estate, leases that Alina had fraudulently signed using my forged adult signature once I turned 18. They hadn't just taken money to raise me. They had been stealing my legal inheritance for 15 years to pay for Chloe's luxury lifestyle, my father's business expansion, and my mother's country club dues. Mother's Day arrived, May 10th. The Oak Ridge Country Club was bathed in bright spring sunlight. The private dining room was reserved for the Vance family, a long table covered in white linen, sparkling crystal, and arrangements of pink peonies. 14 relatives were seated around the table: my parents, Chloe, her wealthy real estate fiancé, my uncles, and my cousins. Chloe arrived 30 minutes late, wearing a silk dress that cost more than my monthly workshop rent. She dramatically set a silver-ribboned Tiffany's box next to my mother's plate. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom," Chloe gushed, kissing Alina on both cheeks. "It's the diamond tennis bracelet we looked at in Union Square. I had Daddy charge it to my card, but I picked it out." Alina beamed, her eyes sparkling as she opened the box and held up the diamonds for the entire table to admire. "Oh, Chloe, darling, you always have such exquisite taste. Truly, a daughter who knows how to make her mother feel special." My father clapped my sister on the back. The uncles raised their wine glasses. Then Alina's eyes drifted to the far end of the table where I sat. I was wearing a simple tailored black suit. Next to my plate sat the bound album, wrapped in plain brown archival paper tied with a natural linen cord. "And what did you bring us, Jillian?" Alina asked, her tone dropping 3 octaves into cold indifference. "More paper and string." A few cousins chuckled. Chloe smirked into her champagne glass. "It's the album I told you about, Mom," I said quietly, keeping my voice entirely even. "I thought today would be the right time to look at where our family actually came from." "Right," Alina sneered, taking a sip of her Pinot Grigio. "Well, let's get it over with." I handed the package down the table. Alina didn't even unwrap the linen cord with care. She took a steak knife, sliced through the thread, and ripped the archival paper off, tossing the wrapper onto the floor near the waiter's tray. She opened the cover. The album was breathtaking: hand-marbled end papers, gold leaf lettering, 30 years of restored photographs laid out in perfect chronological order. But Alina didn't care about the craftsmanship. She flipped through the pages with sharp, aggressive flicks of her manicured fingernails, not pausing once to look at the photos of my childhood, her wedding, or my grandfather. "Honestly, Jillian," Alina said loudly, ensuring the entire table heard every word, "I don't know why you waste your time with this tedious junk. It's just old pictures in a heavy book. Where am I supposed to put this? It doesn't match my living room decor at all." "Mom, be nice," Chloe giggled, fake pouting. "At least she didn't buy you something cheap from a department store." "It is asterisk cheap," Alina said coldly. She closed the album with a heavy clap that made the wine glasses ring. "It's paper, Chloe. It's a glorified scrapbook made by a 33-year-old woman who still refuses to get a real career." My father didn't say a word. He cut a piece of his filet mignon and chewed slowly. Alina picked up the heavy, hand-bound album, the book that represented 40 hours of my labor, my artistic trade, my quiet attempt to offer peace, and she slid her chair back. She walked 3 steps to the service station near the kitchen doors. And right there, in front of 14 family members, the head waiter, and 2 busboys, Alina Vance tossed the album into the stainless steel trash can. It hit the bottom with a hollow, sickening thud, landing squarely on top of greasy cloth napkins and discarded bread crusts. There, Alina said, dusting her hands off as she walked back to her seat. Now we have room on the table for dessert. The dining room went completely silent. My cousin Sarah gasped. My uncle cleared his throat nervously. Chloe smirked. My father didn't look up from his plate. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't throw my wine glass. I stood up slowly. I walked over to the trash can, reached in, and lifted the album out by its spine. I wiped a spot of oil off the dark blue silk with my linen napkin. "Jillian, sit down and stop making a scene," my father barked, his voice sharp. "Your mother didn't like the gift. Get over it." "Oh, I'm not making a scene, Arthur," I said, using his first name for the very first time in my life. My mother's eyes narrowed. "What did you just call your father?" "He's not my father," I said, my voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling of the private dining room. "And you are certainly not my mother." Alina laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. "She's lost her mind. The stress of running that little shop has finally broken her." I opened the album to the very last page, the page Alina hadn't bothered to look at. I unclipped the restored black-and-white photograph from August 18th, 1990, and set it directly in the center of Alina's dessert plate, right on top of her raspberry tart. Next to the photograph, I placed 3 notarized documents I had pulled from my blazer pocket. A certified copy of the 1990 Croft adoption agreement, the Portland Hospital birth record, and the original receipt for $250,000 paid to Alina Thorne Vance. Alina looked down at the plate. The color drained from her face so fast it looked as if she'd been struck by lightning. Her fork slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the china. "What is that?" Arthur demanded, leaning forward, his forehead creasing. "Alina, what is she talking about?" Alina couldn't speak. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her eyes were fixed on the date stamp and the signature at the bottom of the legal receipt, Alina Vance. "Read it out loud, Mom," I said, leaning over the table, my hands resting flat on the white tablecloth. "Read the part where you took $250,000 from Jonathan Croft to take Evelyn Croft's illegitimate baby off their hands. Read the part where you swore under oath never to tell me who I was so you and Arthur could lease the Croft timberland in Maine for 50 cents on the dollar." Arthur snapped his head toward Alina, his jaw dropping. What timberland?" "You didn't tell him either, did you, Alina?" I asked, my voice deadly soft. "You told Arthur that you negotiated those timber leases through an old family friend. You didn't tell him that you were using my birthright to fund his company's expansion while you treated me like a beggar at your table." Chloe looked between our mother and me, her face pale. "Mom, what is she talking about? Who is Evelyn Croft?" "Shut up," Alina suddenly screamed, her voice cracking as she slammed both hands onto the table, knocking over her wine glass. Red wine pooled across the white linen, soaking into the papers on her plate. "Shut up, Jillian. You don't know what you're talking about. You were a bastard child. I saved you. I gave you a roof over your head." "You didn't save me," I said, looking her straight in the eye without a single flicker of fear. "You bought me, and then you robbed me." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a 4th document, a formal summons from the California Superior Court and the Maine State Chancery. "Mr. Julian Croft, my biological uncle, has assumed full control of the Croft estate records," I announced to the entire table. "Yesterday morning, a freeze was placed on every timber lease granted to Vance Development Corporation due to 33 years of fraudulent guardianship signatures. And as of 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, the California State Marshals will be executing an asset freeze on all joint accounts under the name of Alina and Arthur Vance pending the audit of my stolen trust." Arthur stood up so fast his chair flipped backward, crashing onto the carpet. "An asset freeze? Jillian, are you out of your mind? My business has payroll on Tuesday." "Then I suggest you ask Chloe to sell her Tiffany's bracelet," I said. I picked up my hand-bound album, held it against my chest, and looked at my mother one last time. She was sitting in her chair, shaking, her hands covered in spilled red wine, staring at the adoption paper that exposed 33 years of lies to every relative in her high society circle. "Happy Mother's Day, Alina," I said quietly. "You can keep the memory. I'm taking the rest." I turned on my heel and walked out of the Oak Ridge Country Club. Behind me, the room exploded into screaming, shouting, and the sound of my father demanding answers that Alina would never be able to give him. The next 3 months were a hurricane of legal, financial, and emotional reckoning. When the audit of the Croft estate was completed by an independent forensic accounting firm, the full scope of the fraud was laid bare. Alina had not only kept the initial $250,000, she had deposited monthly dividend checks meant for my maintenance into a private offshore account that she used to pay for Chloe's private school tuition, luxury vacations, and country club memberships. Total amount stolen over 33 years, $3.8 million. Because Arthur Vance's company had relied on fraudulent, unauthorized timber leases on Croft land, the Croft Trust filed a federal lawsuit against Vance Development Corp. To avoid criminal prosecution for corporate fraud. Arthur was forced to liquidate 3 of his major commercial real estate holdings in Sacramento. He lost his company. He lost his reputation. And within 6 weeks of the dinner at Oak Ridge, Arthur filed for divorce from Alina, claiming he had been kept entirely in the dark about her illegal financial schemes. Chloe's high society fiancé broke off their engagement 3 weeks after the scandal broke. Without her father's credit card or her mother's stolen dividend fund, Chloe was forced to sell her San Francisco condo to pay off her personal debts. She moved into a small 1-bedroom rental in Sacramento and took a job as a retail associate at a department store, the very first real job of her life. Alina was forced to sell her Upper East Side townhome to satisfy the civil judgment awarded to me by the court. She lives now in a modest 2-bedroom retirement apartment outside Fresno, isolated from her high society friends, her reputation destroyed, and her daughters nowhere to be found. She has called my workshop 7 times in the last 6 months. I have never answered once. As for me, through the Croft estate, I finally received what was legally and rightfully mine. Full ownership of the 4,000-acre Croft Timber Reserve in Maine, along with the back dividends that Alina had tried so hard to steal. I didn't buy a mansion. I didn't buy a fleet of luxury cars. I used a portion of the funds to purchase the historic brick building on Elm Street where my workshop sits. I expanded the studio, hired 2 young apprentices who couldn't afford formal trade school, and established a nonprofit foundation that preserves rare historical manuscripts and teaches traditional book arts to underprivileged youth. Mr. Julian Croft, my real uncle, visits my shop every month. We sit at my consultation table with mismatched teacups, drink black tea, and talk about his sister Evelyn, the mother I never got to know, but whose dignity and strength I carry in my veins every single day. 2 weeks ago, a package arrived at my studio by certified mail. No return address, but I recognized the shaky, elegant handwriting on the label immediately. Inside was the hand-bound album from Mother's Day. Alina had retrieved it from the garbage, cleaned the leather spine, and sent it back to me. Tucked inside the front cover was a handwritten note on plain notebook paper. "I'm sorry, Jillian, please." I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage. I felt only a quiet, clean lightness in my chest, the freedom of a woman who no longer needs permission to exist. I walked over to my workbench, picked up the note, and dropped it into the small brass burner where I melt hide glue. I watched the paper curl, turn black, and vanish into ash. Then I closed the album, placed it safely on the top shelf of my archival library, alongside the histories that actually matter, and went back to work.